Hello there!
Hello there.
Open world in video games is definitely not a new concept, but back in the day the developers had to be really convinced that having an open world is where they want to put their resources. However, at some point having an open world in your game became a marketing buzzword, and some developers tried to, or were forced to, create a game that utilized all those freedom and exploration mechanics, and sometimes it was an extremely bad idea. With Doom: The Dark Ages announced to utilize some open-world elements, which surprised me a lot, to be honest, let's take a look at games that went into a similar open-world-y direction, and it turned out to be a mistake. Let's go. Now, before we begin, this video contains a mix of pretty obvious examples with some personal subjective takes on some of those video games. They're not meant to be a hot take to start a war in the comments, but rather a perspective that I know not everyone will share with me. I'll be happy to hear your opinions on some of these, as well as some things that you feel could fit into this video, but we gotta start with Mafia.
I used to be a taxi driver.
The Mafia series is a classic. It started in 2002 with The City of Lost Haven, and the story of a cab driver named Tommy who, in an unexpected turn of events, became a part of the group run by Don Salieri. The plot of the game was presented in the form of flashbacks, and these were linear missions that the game required us to do. Even though we could drive around the city, there were no additional activities to be done. Full focus on the story, action, and the overall atmosphere of the 1930s. Sure, there was a free ride mode that had some missions, but the core of the game, the first playthrough that you ever did, was very simple. Play the story of Tommy Angelo in a linear fashion without any distractions. Then came Mafia 2 and the story of Vito Scaletta, which moved us to the city of Empire Bay. The core gameplay was kept very similar in terms of linearity, although there were notable reports over the years coming from people who worked on the game that a lot of content was cut from Mafia 2, with the whole campaign in Sicily among others. During development, the devs most probably played around with side missions, but removed them. However, we still had some side activities like collecting Playboy magazines, car thefts, or bringing cars to a junkyard for extra money. And in hindsight, Mafia 2 was a sign of where the gameplay of the series is going next, because the next game went full GTA style and people were not too happy about it. The publisher of Mafia 3 probably saw how successful was the approach that Rockstar Games had with GTA and wanted to have their own piece of the pie by making the game filled with side content and it being much more open-worldy than the previous entries in the series. Apart from the main story, you had side missions, racket takeovers, missions for the underbosses, car theft, car races, lots of collectibles. Everything was really repetitive and people didn't really like that approach. If we take a look at user scores on Metacritic, and let's take PC for each platform to have some sort of similar baseline, we have Mafia 1 with 8.4, Mafia 2 with 8.2, and Mafia 3 5.4. And that tells you a lot. Now, we can understand the open world as having freedom of choice on how to get to our destination, and in this case, Mafia games were always open world games. But I don't think that Mafia games can be treated as the modern open world because they initially lacked the typical open world gameplay and content. Mafia 3 presented what it means to have a typical open world game without Rockstar Games' expertise to execute it. However, the remake of the first Mafia game was a success with all its linearity, and I hope that the upcoming Old Country will take the similar road and general approach to how to build a Mafia game. For now, let's head to bad decisions made by Call of Duty.
May God continue to bless the United States of America.
Now, I know, who cares for the campaign in Call of Duty? Well, I do. I mostly buy CODs for the campaign, I play some multiplayer, but then I usually go back to more Battlefield kind of gameplay. That's why story campaigns in Call of Duties are important to me. Actually, always have been. I remember playing the originals as they were coming out, although I definitely shouldn't have done that seeing the age ratings today. But anyway. This is something that Modern Warfare 3 in the rebooted series already introduced, with much more open maps, multiple objectives, and generally the approach that you're not supposed to go along a line laid down by the devs. But instead, have more freedom of choice. They called it open combat missions. And in Black Ops 6, it was taken to an even higher level, especially with one mission called Hunting Season. Here you're basically thrown in the desert in Iraq, and after the initial linear experience, you open your tactical map and see multiple objectives, you're given a vehicle, and now you gotta go finish all of those. And I'm sorry, but that was probably one of the worst things I have played within that series. Not because it was executed exceptionally badly, but because this is not why I'm playing Call of Duty games. I want to have a linear experience, I want to have weapons in my hand, and go through a big number of enemies while pretending that there's any tactical approach in what I'm doing. I want lots of scripted moments, explosions, epic things happening. Call of Duty for games is what Fast and Furious is for movies.
I don't have friends. I got family.
And I like that. I come into the series with certain expectations. Giving me open world missions is definitely not what I'm looking for in a game that is supposed to give me a campaign that I can finish in 2 or 3 evenings by blasting my way forward. The exact same thing was what I didn't like in Halo Infinite, since I always preferred the corridor-like map design and a linear experience of Master Chief's adventures. It's the same thing that worries me a bit about the new Doom game, but well, we'll cross that bridge when we get there. Just please, no more open world in Call of Duty games. I will even let some teenager decimate me in multiplayer, and I let him tell me what he... never mind. Let's move on to some magic. Now, before you tell me that the open world in Hogwarts Legacy is great, then yes, I agree with you, mostly. There's one aspect of it that I didn't like at all. In general, Hogwarts Legacy is the ultimate dream come true for all the fans of the original games done back in the 2000s by Electronic Arts. Exploring Hogwarts, solving puzzles, it was always fun, and seeing this done in a modern way, well, I enjoyed it. Walking around the castle made me very happy, finding secrets, solving those puzzles, and going to classes. Getting out of the castle, straight into Hogsmeade or to the train station where Hogwarts Express takes all the students. I liked that as well, but behind all these pretty iconic places, a stretch of unknown land starts, and for the most part, it's boring, useless, and uninteresting. Sure, we did have stuff to do in-game. We could be looking for field guides or demiguise statues, doing Merlin trials, fighting in the arena, taming creatures, doing broom challenges, or simply eliminating enemies roaming the land. But I felt that this part of the game, taking place further away from the castle, was just filler content, a part of the map where all the bloated elements went to make sure that the player can spend more hours in the game. Compare the final high-level region with the castle that was just fun to explore, and you'll quickly realize that the magic is, well, maybe not gone, but it's definitely something handled by a squib. Sales of the game were really great, but I wonder how much of it was just Hogwarts and how much of it was the way the game was designed. And I kind of feel like I know the answer to that. I don't think that Hogwarts Legacy open world is bad in itself. I just feel like they fell into a common trap of sacrificing the quality of the content for the size of the game. And that wasn't really the perfect approach. And neither was the next game on my list.
Dogen sends his best.
This game has been a bit forgotten by time, but back when the first Mirror's Edge came out, it was definitely something unique. A world of the future, strictly controlled by the government, with only the select few, the so-called runners, being the spearhead of opposition. A grounded story, really well done parkour for the time, unusual setting. It was a pleasant gaming experience, a linear one, not really focused on combat, but rather on the joy of figuring out a parkour puzzle that was completing a level in the fastest and coolest way possible. The game's reception was generally favorable, even though by today's standards people might say that it was nothing special. It's hard to overlook its influence on games though, especially if you look at Titanfall or Dying Light that both utilize the parkour mechanics to a great extent. And if we look again at Metacritic for this, then you have the first game that is at 7.7, really good, and the second game is 5.9. And because we're already pretty far away in this video, you probably know why. It's actually a mix of things. Mirror's Edge Catalyst was criticized for its combat, its story, and some people took issue with the general design of the city. The movement system was still praised because it was a joy to run, but the movement system alone can only take you so far in liking the game. The linear construction of the first game allowed for a much more detailed level design, and you could feel that it was really thought through. With the open world and giving a player more freedom of exploration, everything gets diluted, and suddenly running can become a chore instead of a fun mechanic. Probably that's why the game introduced a fast travel system, but doesn't it really beat the whole point of the game about running? It's possible to make a good open-world game with parkour mechanics. You have Dying Light, for example, then you also have Dying Light 2, which still has its devoted fanbase, but Mirror's Edge Catalyst didn't manage to achieve the same success. And that's actually a shame, because I wouldn't mind having another game starring Faith.
What is that?
That is your future.
No way this is home.
Now, I am a fan of the Mass Effect series. I love Shepard's trilogy, I can't wait for the next Mass Effect, but I also liked Andromeda. Sure, I have some issues with it, but this entry in the series is not as bad as people painted it to be when it was first released. Andromeda had a huge task of living up to the series that became iconic to so many people, and at the same time heed to the orders from EA that this game needs to be bigger and offer a lot of playtime to the players, and that means creating a more open-world kind of gameplay. Even though Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3 had a lot of freedom in terms of movement and exploration, I would never consider it to be a proper open-world game. All of them consisted of a collection of hubs, and the whole experience was a pretty linear one, even though you could often select the order in which you were doing main quests. There were lots of side activities, typical to open-world RPGs, so sure, I can agree it had elements of an open-world game, but it wasn't there yet. However, between Mass Effect 3 and between Andromeda came Dragon Age Inquisition, and that changed a lot. I always liked the Dragon Age, but Inquisition disappointed me with its open-world design that wasn't really fun to explore. Big, bloated locations filled with filler quests or with repeatable requisition missions, collecting flowers or rocks, sticking banners in the ground as if it's the British Empire colonizing the world, and a wrong way of communicating to the player that you don't need to, and actually you shouldn't, stay in one place to clear it all up, because you'll be able to get back there easily. Worst mistake Hinterlands made, and that's why it put off so many people. And then comes Andromeda, that fixed some of the issues that Dragon Age Inquisition had, but didn't manage to fix all of them. BioWare learned how to pace the open world better by not allowing you to access whole planets at once. The number of locations was limited, but they were made bigger, which was a step in the right direction. But even though they tried to get rid of some filler quests and prepare more meaningful content, they did not manage to do that completely, and only more die-hard fans of Mass Effect accepted Andromeda for what it was. Well, like me. I think expectations for Andromeda were set really high, and the game just didn't live up to those, even though it wasn't objectively so bad. I actually think that gameplay-wise Andromeda introduced a lot of positive changes. Combat was much more fun, and exploring the world with the Nomad was definitely a lot better than any ground vehicles in the original trilogy. What many people overlooked was that BioWare improved a lot on the design of Inquisition, and I think at some point in the future they might have perfected creating the open world. But then there was Anthem that failed, and last year's Veilguard already showed that BioWare took a step back in terms of level design and were for a more linear exploration, even though the levels weren't really that small. And that Metroidvania-like map design is what I actually didn't mind about Veilguard. So we can say that Mass Effect Andromeda tried. BioWare evolved the formula, but it still wasn't what the fans expected, and even though some of us liked it, BioWare is already heading in a different direction, so the open-world design of the games done by BioWare can be treated as a mistake by the studio itself. But now, I left this example for last because I know this is a hugely unpopular opinion, and probably most of you will disagree. Okay, so I get it that in general, racing games went into the direction of giving the player an open world where you can drive everywhere, see stuff, do stuff, find stuff. Basically, it's an open world sandbox in which you go from one race to another, you visit garages, warehouses, and all the other things that can be done that the game has to offer. You encounter random people or bots you can race against. Need for Speed does that, Forza does that, Test Drive Unlimited does that. It creates this idea of a living city that you're being a part of. I know, this is the general trend, and people widely accept it. But I don't really like it. Back in 2003, when the first Need for Speed Underground released, it got me hooked because of its nighttime racing, the import scene, and in general because it focused on doing races against more and more difficult opponents. It was a gradual mix of modes that provided a fun variety. I liked getting new cars, changing how they look, buying new parts, and racing with the absolute bangers blasting from my speakers. And the best part about it, I could jump straight into the race from the menus without driving around the city. Sure, an open-world city is fun for a while, but after some time, it just bores me, and I just want to race. I want to beat those damn Hondas, Nissans, or Toyotas, and seeing where car games went in general, I'm definitely in the minority of players who think that. So, for me, personally, and I don't expect anyone to do anything about it, having open-world sandbox in car games is a mistake.
And on that bombshell,
It is time to end. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope that right now in the comments we can have a discussion about your examples that could fit into this video. And please don't hate me a lot for Need for Speed. I get it. I know I'm in the minority, but that's how I am. Thank you anyway. Take care.
General Kenobi.